I came home after a double shift thinking I'd survived another day and found my grandmother sitting outside my door with two suitcases and a note that said, "Don't contact us again." They didn't call. They didn't ask. They just left her there like she was something they were done carrying. I was already working two jobs just to stay afloat. And somehow I became the one responsible for everything they walked away from. But that wasn't the part that broke me. It was what they did after. They came back. Not for her, but for what she still had. And the day she finally spoke, after months of silence, she didn't just shock the room, she exposed everything. Before we go any further, tell me this. What would you have done in my place, and where are you listening from tonight? Because this story starts with a quiet hallway, two old suitcases, and a decision that was never supposed to be mine. By the time I climbed the third floor stairs, my legs felt like somebody else's. The warehouse had been short two men that night, which meant the rest of us paid for it in our backs. My jacket smelled like cardboard dust and cold air. All I wanted was 10 minutes of quiet, a hot shower if the water held out, and maybe half a sandwich before I had to think about the auto shop in the morning. Then I saw the suitcases. Two old hard-shell cases sat right outside my apartment door, side by side like they'd been placed there carefully. Not dumped, arranged. One had a faded airline tag still looped through the handle. The name had been torn halfway off. For a second, I thought one of the upstairs tenants had left them there by mistake. Then I saw my grandmother. Elspeth Kincaid was sitting in the hallway chair near the vending machine, hands folded over her purse, coat buttoned all the way up. She wasn't slumped or confused. She wasn't wandering. She was waiting. The overhead light buzzed above her, washing everything in that tired yellow color old buildings seemed to love. There was a folded note resting on top of the smaller suitcase. I picked it up and opened it. "Don't contact us again. She'll be more comfortable with you." No signature, no explanation. Just that. I looked down both ends of the hallway, expecting maybe my mother to step out from the stairwell with that tight look she got whenever she'd already decided something for everyone else. Nothing. A door clicked shut somewhere on the second floor. A television mumbled behind thin walls. That was it. Grandma lifted her eyes to me. I unlocked my door and opened it wide. "Come on, Grandma!" I did not call anybody. Inside, the place looked smaller than it had that morning. One bed against the wall, one chair by the window, a narrow counter crowded with unopened mail, a jar of spare change, and two utility bills I'd been avoiding on principle because I couldn't avoid them any other way. I set the suitcases just inside the door and helped her ease into the chair. My phone buzzed before I could even take off my boots. "Family group chat. Lenora, we assumed you'd handle it. It's temporary." Corwin, "She'll be better off with you." Bram, "It's not like you've got much going on anyway." I read the messages once, then again, slower. Not because I hadn't understood them the first time, because sometimes cruelty lands cleaner when you let it finish speaking. They didn't ask. They assigned. I turned my phone face down on the counter. Have you ever opened a door and realized your own family had already closed one on you? That's what it felt like. Not a fight, not a blow-up. Just a decision made somewhere else delivered to my address. Grandma said nothing. She hadn't spoken in months, not since the stroke, and everybody in the family used that like a period at the end of every conversation about her. Case closed. Problem solved. But her eyes tracked me as I moved around the room, and there was nothing vacant in them. "You hungry?" I asked. No answer. "Tea?" Still nothing. Then, when I crouched to open the first suitcase, she reached out and pressed my wrist once. Light, deliberate, the clothes inside were folded neatly. Sweaters layered with tissue paper, a pill organizer, prescription bottles in a zip bag, a list of medication times written in my mother's handwriting, clean and upright like she was labeling leftovers for a church potluck. Somebody had taken time with all this. Somebody had thought about what would be needed. Just not who would do it. I checked the second suitcase. Socks, nightgowns, a framed photograph wrapped in one of her scarves, and a small tin of tea bags, the kind she always liked. So they'd packed comfort. They just hadn't packed conscience. I look back at the note in my hand. They hadn't dumped a problem. They had delivered a responsibility they didn't want touching their own lives. I folded the paper once and placed it on the counter beside the bills. Then I got to work. I pulled the chair farther from the draft under the window, shifted a stack of boxes into the closet, stripped my bed and remade it tighter so she could sit on the edge if she needed to. Found an extra blanket in the hall cabinet and laid it across her lap. The room changed shape around us, one practical adjustment at a time. Not enough space, not enough money, not enough anything really, but enough for tonight. Outside, a siren passed and faded. Somewhere below us, a car door slammed. I finally took off my jacket and hung it on the back of the bathroom door. When I came out, she was still watching me. This wasn't a mistake, I said, mostly to myself. It was a decision, just not mine. I switched off the overhead light and left the lamp on near the bed. The room softened around the edges. My phone stayed dark on the counter. I never turned it back over. I didn't choose this. But standing there in that cramped apartment with 2 suitcases by the door and my grandmother sitting quietly in my only chair, I already knew I wasn't going to walk away. The next morning, I woke up with my neck twisted the wrong way and one arm hanging off the edge of the bed. For a few seconds, I didn't remember why the room felt different. Then I saw the second blanket folded over the chair, one suitcase by the wall, the other half open near the counter, and my grandmother sitting by the window in my only good sweater, looking out at the parking lot like she'd been there for hours. Nothing in that room belonged to me anymore. Not the floor space, not the silence, not even the shape of my own routine. I checked the time and set up too fast. I was already late for the auto shop. That was the moment I could have fixed it, if you want to call it that. I could have called my mother. I could have said, "Come get her." I could have told Corwin that whatever arrangement they thought they'd made, I wasn't part of it. I stood there with one sock on, phone in my hand, and every number I needed a thumb's reach away. I didn't make the call. I pulled my spare blanket out of the closet instead, folded it in half, and set up a place for her near the window where the light came in best. "This'll have to do for now," I said. She watched me the whole time. No one asked me, but somehow I was the only one who answered. The first week moved like that. Not in days exactly, more in tasks. Pills with breakfast, water by the chair, heat turned down at night because the gas bill was already higher than it should have been. I found an old plastic bin and turned it into a medicine station. I wrote down times on scraps of paper and taped them to the cabinet. I labeled the shelves so I could reach things half awake before heading out. Oatmeal in the mornings when I had it, toast when I didn't, soup from a can if I got home early enough to heat it before my warehouse shift. I learned how long it took her to get from the chair to the bathroom. I learned which step on my floor creaked loud enough to wake her. I learned she preferred tea barely warm, not hot, and that she hated the television turned up too high. I learned how to keep moving when I hadn't slept enough to be steady. I didn't think of myself as noble, just tired. At the auto shop, I must have looked worse than I thought. Earl, one of the older mechanics, tossed me a rag and said, "You look like you're running a nursing home out of that apartment." He laughed after he said it, like it was harmless. Maybe he meant it that way. I shrugged and went back to the brake job in front of me. Something like that. But the truth sat under my ribs all day. They had lives. I had responsibilities that weren't even mine. By the end of that week, the bills had started stacking in 2 piles instead of 1. Mine and hers, even though hers weren't legally mine. Prescription co-pays, extra groceries, a shower stool I found cheap at a medical supply place across town. When I checked my balance one night, standing under the humming fluorescent lights at the gas station after filling up just enough to get through 2 more shifts, I stood there longer than I should have. I cut back on food first. You do that when you're trying to make numbers behave. Fewer hot meals, more coffee, less meat, cheaper bread. I could get by. Her medication, though, never became optional. Not once. If you've ever been the one carrying more than you can afford, you know how quiet it gets. Some people don't fall apart when life hits them. They just get quieter and carry more. Have you ever been that person? The second week, I started noticing things. Not big things, small corrections. I put her tea on the wrong side of the table one evening, and she tapped the wood twice, then looked at the other end. I moved it. She relaxed. Another time, I folded one of her cardigans and set it in the wrong suitcase pocket, and she reached over, took it back, and placed it where she wanted it without even looking down. Once, while I was rushing to get my boots on, I grabbed the wrong pill bottle. Her hand came down over mine before I could open it. She wasn't gone, just not speaking. That distinction mattered more than I could explain. One night I got home after the warehouse, sometime close to 1 in the morning. The hallway smelled like boiled cabbage and old carpet. My shoulders felt worked down to the bone. I let myself into the apartment quietly, expecting to find her asleep under the blanket by the window. She was still awake. The lamp was on. The room was dim and yellow. My dinner plate from the night before was still on the counter because I'd been too tired to wash it. I sat across from her without taking my coat off. I didn't have anything worth saying. After a minute, she reached out and nudged the folded note on the counter so it lined up square with the edge. A tiny thing. Precise. Intentional. I looked at that note, then at her. She had been paying attention to everything. Not just to the room, to me. That changed something. Not all at once, not enough to make any of it easy. But the job of it shifted. It wasn't just obligation now, it was awareness. Witness. By the end of those first 2 weeks, the apartment had been rearranged around her completely. My laundry basket had moved into the bathroom. My shoes lived under the table. Her tea tin sat on the counter where my spare change used to be. The place no longer looked like a studio a tired man rented because it was what he could afford. It looked like a life in emergency transition. I stood in the middle of it one night after she'd fallen asleep, listening to the old heater click and cough in the wall. Nothing was where it used to be. Not my hours, not my space, not my body. I didn't fight it anymore. I didn't choose that life, but I was already too deep in it to pretend it wasn't mine. That was when I began to understand something I should have seen sooner. Her silence wasn't empty. It was watching. It started with something small enough to ignore if I'd wanted to. After those first couple of weeks, I had settled into a rhythm that wasn't comfortable, but at least predictable. That morning before heading out, I poured her tea and set it down without thinking, left side of the table instead of the right. She didn't reach for it. She tapped twice with her fingers, then shifted her eyes toward the other side. Not random, not impatient, exact. I moved the cup. Her shoulders eased just slightly. That's when it settled in differently, not as a thought, but as a quiet realization that didn't leave. So I started paying attention. Later that evening, after I got back from the shop and before heading to the warehouse, I turned on the television. A news segment came on. I changed the channel mid-sentence just to see. Her eyes followed the remote, then went back to the screen, then back to me. Not confused, tracking. The next day, I moved her medication tray a few inches off its usual spot before I left. When I came home, it was back where it belonged, not pushed, placed, carefully. I began asking questions I knew she wouldn't answer out loud. You remember where you used to keep your recipes? Nothing. But her gaze drifted toward the second suitcase. Always accurate. She wasn't trapped in silence, I thought. She was choosing it. That idea didn't comfort me. It made the room feel smaller. Weeks passed. The cold outside sharpened, and inside everything tightened with it. My routine didn't change, but the weight of it did. At the warehouse, I missed a count on an incoming shipment and had to redo a whole pallet. My supervisor pulled me aside near the loading dock. You with us tonight, Dashiell? He asked. Not unkind, but not patient either. I'm here, I said. Be more than that, he replied, then walked off. At the shop the next day, I dropped a wrench hard enough to draw a look from Earl. He didn't joke this time, just nodded once, like he understood something he wasn't going to ask about. By the time I got home that evening, everything in me felt stretched thin, not broken, just pulled tight enough that one more thing might do it. I stepped inside, closed the door with my heel, and leaned against it for a second before moving further in. The counter was covered, bills I hadn't opened. A missed call notification blinking on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. A letter about a rent increase slipped halfway out of its envelope like it had been trying to get my attention all day. I didn't take my coat off. I walked to the table and sat down. Then I just stayed there. No movement. No sound except the heater clicking in the wall. For the first time since she'd been dropped at my door, the thought didn't just pass through me, it stayed. I can't do this. Have you ever reached a point where doing the right thing felt like it was slowly breaking you? I picked up my phone without realizing I'd decided to. Scrolled through my contacts until I found my mother's name. My thumb hovered over it. If I called, everything would change. They would take her back, or at least pretend to. They would make arrangements, pass responsibility around like they always did, but at least it wouldn't sit on my shoulders alone. I could sleep again, eat properly, go back to something that resembled a life I recognized. I stared at the screen. If I call, they'll take over, and I can go back to normal. The word didn't sit right. There was no normal before this, just quieter versions of the same kind of neglect. I lowered the phone slightly and looked at the counter. The note was still there, where I had placed it weeks ago. I reached for it, unfolded it slowly, and read it again. Don't contact us again. It didn't feel shocking anymore. It felt clear. They didn't leave her, I thought. They discarded her. There's a difference. Leaving suggests there was something to come back to. This didn't. I folded the paper along the same crease and set it down. Then I placed my phone beside it. I didn't make the call. After a while, I realized she was watching me. I looked up. She hadn't moved. Same chair, same posture. But her eyes were steady on me, like she had been following the entire exchange without a single word. I exhaled slowly and leaned back in my chair. I almost gave you back tonight, I said. The words didn't sound dramatic, just honest. She didn't react the way most people would. No expression of hurt, no visible relief. Just that same steady presence. That was harder to sit with than anything else, because it meant she understood. I stayed there a little longer, letting the room settle again. Something shifted in me then, not loud, not sudden, just a line drawn somewhere I hadn't marked before. I wasn't doing this because I had to anymore. I was doing it because I chose not to be like them. I stood up, gathered the bills into a single stack, and moved them to one side of the counter. Not solved, just organized. That was enough for the night. As I turned off the main light and left the lamp on for her, one thought stayed with me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding what I was actually standing in. And I was just beginning to see it. That's when the money showed up, and nothing about it made sense. The first time I saw it, I almost ignored it. It happened in the middle of a workday, during a short break at the auto shop. I had grease on my hands and 5 minutes to sit down before the next car rolled in. I pulled out my phone mostly to check the time, maybe glance at my balance the way you do when you're trying to stay ahead of bills that don't care how tired you are. That's when I noticed the number. An $800 deposit. No name, no note. Just a transfer code I didn't recognize. I stared at it longer than I should have, like it might explain itself if I gave it enough attention. Money didn't just show up in my life. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped outside the bay doors, dialing the bank while the cold air cut through my jacket. After 10 minutes of being transferred and put on hold, I got a polite voice that didn't tell me much. It appears to be a valid transfer, sir. From who? I'm not able to see a name attached, just the originating system. So it could be a mistake? It's unlikely, but not impossible. That was all I got. I hung up and went back inside, but I didn't touch the money. Not that day, not that week. I treated it like it didn't belong to me. About a month later, I checked again. Another $800. Same code, same silence. This time, I didn't need to call the bank. I already knew what they were going to say. It wasn't random, it was scheduled. That realization sat with me as I drove home that night, the heater barely keeping up with the cold creeping through the car doors. The apartment looked the same when I walked in, small, tight, functional. But the pressure inside it had changed. The rent notice was still sitting where I'd left it. The pharmacy receipt had doubled since the last time I checked. My hours at the warehouse had been cut back just enough to make things uncomfortable without giving me anything to argue with. I stood at the counter looking at the numbers in my account. I didn't trust it, I thought, but I needed it. I used part of it the next morning. Carefully, I paid for her medication first, then a portion of the rent. Nothing extra, nothing wasteful, just enough to keep things from slipping further. I didn't tell anyone. At the pharmacy later that week, Maribel noticed before I said anything. She had a way of doing that. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, always moving like she was 3 steps ahead of whatever was in front of her. "You've been picking up the same prescriptions, right on schedule," she said while ringing me up. "No gaps. That's not easy." "Just staying on top of it," I replied. She nodded, then glanced at the total before looking back at me. "You paying out of pocket for all this?" "Mostly." She paused, then leaned slightly on the counter. "Let me ask you something. Has anything about your situation changed recently?" I hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Why?" I asked. "Because people don't go from struggling to steady without something shifting," she said. "Even a little." I thought about the deposits. "It's nothing I can explain," I said. She studied me for a second, then asked, "Does it happen on the same date every month?" I didn't answer right away, because it did. "That's not random," she said quietly. "That's intentional." That word stayed with me longer than the conversation. Intentional. Someone was doing this on purpose. When I got home that evening, I didn't say anything about it. I moved through the usual routine. Tea, medication, checking the heat, making sure everything was in place. But I was paying closer attention now, not just to her, to everything. A couple of days later, my phone buzzed while I was at the table sorting through bills. Lenora. How is she doing? That was it? No apology? No acknowledgement. Just a question. Before I could even decide whether to respond, another message came through. "Did she leave anything important with you?" Then Corwin followed. "There might be documents, old financial stuff. Just checking." The tone had changed. Not softer, sharper, focused. I stared at the messages, reading between the lines the way I should have from the beginning. They didn't ask about her. They asked about what she might still have. When people come back into your life but only with questions about what you have, what does that tell you? I typed out a reply. "She's fine." That was it. Short, closed, no details. Lenora responded quickly. "Good. Just keep us posted," Corwin added, almost like a reminder. "If you find anything, let us know." I set the phone down. I didn't mention the money. I didn't mention how aware she was. I didn't mention anything that could give them a way back in. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what they did. I was choosing what they didn't get to know. That night, after everything had settled, I sat across from her again. The same chair, the same dim light. But I was looking at her differently, watching the way she held herself, the way her eyes met mine without hesitation. There was nothing fragile about it. No confusion, no emptiness, control, clear and steady. And for a brief moment, something passed between us. Not a word, not even a gesture. Understanding. She knew something, I thought, and whatever it was, they were coming back for it. I leaned back slightly, the weight of that realization settling in deeper than anything that had come before. This wasn't just about keeping things together anymore. It was about what was coming next. The next time they showed up, they didn't ask. They tried to take. It happened on a weekday, just after I got back from the shop. I remember because I hadn't even taken my jacket off yet. The air inside the apartment still held that dry heat from the unit kicking on and off, and I was halfway through setting water on the stove when I heard the handle turn. Not a knock, a turn. The door opened before I reached it. Corwin stepped in like he'd been there yesterday. No hesitation. No pause to see if he was welcome. Just straight inside, eyes already moving across the room. He took in everything in seconds. The chair by the window. The suitcases. The way the table had been shifted. My grandmother sitting where the light hit her face just right. He didn't greet her. Didn't even look at her long enough for it to count. "We need to talk," he said. "Not how are you. Not this must be hard. Business." I closed the door behind him slowly. "You could have knocked." He ignored that. Walked further in, like space was something he expected to be given. "This won't take long," he said, setting a thin folder on the table. I didn't sit. "Then say it," I replied. He opened the folder, pulled out a few papers, and laid them flat like he was presenting something routine. Then he slid a pen across the table toward my grandmother. "She just needs to sign," he said. I stepped forward before the pen even stopped moving. "She's not signing anything." Corwin didn't look surprised, just annoyed. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said, voice tightening. "I understand enough," I answered. He leaned slightly, lowering his tone. "There's an account tied to her. Old estate matter. Grandpa's side. It's family property." That word again. Family. Used like it meant something steady. I didn't move. "Then why wasn't family involved when you left her here?" He didn't answer that, just tapped the papers once with his finger. "This needs to be handled now." I glanced down. Legal language. Dense. Clean. Designed to look official enough that most people wouldn't question it. Extraction. Not help. "You're not taking anything out of this room today," I said. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not anger yet. Calculation. "You're in over your head," he said quietly. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "Then explain it," I replied, without a pen in her hand. He didn't, because that wasn't the goal. Control was. He straightened and changed approach. "Bram's in trouble," he said. "Real trouble. This isn't about convenience anymore. There are legal implications. If this doesn't get resolved, it affects everyone." That reframed it. Not care, urgency, desperation dressed up as responsibility. "You're part of this family too," he added. I shook my head once. "No," I said. "I'm just the one you leave things with." That landed. He didn't speak for a second. "What would you do if the same people who walked away came back only when they needed something from you?" Corwin stepped closer, just enough to try to take control of the space again. "You can't handle this," he said. "You don't even know what you're protecting." He wasn't wrong about one thing. I didn't know everything. That was the problem. For a brief moment, I felt it fully. The weight of it. Legal words I didn't understand. Situations bigger than my apartment, bigger than my paychecks, bigger than anything I dealt with before. If I say no, I make enemies. If I say yes, I become one of them. I looked at my grandmother. She hadn't moved, but her eyes were on me, steady as ever, waiting, not for instruction, for a decision. I reached down, gathered the papers, and placed them back into his folder. "You need to leave," I said. He didn't move right away. "This isn't over," he replied. "I know." He held my gaze a second longer, then took the folder from my hand. No slammed door, no raised voice. Just tension that stayed in the room after he stepped out. I locked the door behind him. For a second, I stood there, hand still on the handle. Then it hit. Not fear exactly, the cost. My hands started to shake, just slightly, enough that I had to press them against the counter to steady them. That was what saying no felt like. Not powerful, not clean, heavy. I took a breath, then another, until it settled. When I turned back toward the room, she was still watching. Same as always. But now something in the space between us had changed. That was the first time I said no, and meant it. I thought that would be enough to keep them away. I was wrong. It started with an envelope that didn't look important enough to change anything. I found it in the mailbox after a late shift, tucked between grocery flyers and a folded utility notice. Thick paper, formal return address, the kind of mail you don't open right away because you already know it's not going to make your day better. I brought it upstairs, set it on the counter, and took off my jacket first. Washed my hands, checked on her, made sure everything was in place. Only then did I open it. The language inside was clean, structured, polite in a way that didn't feel polite at all. A request for documentation, a review of living conditions, concerns about long-term care stability. A mention of alternative guardianship. No accusations, no raised tone, but the direction was clear. They weren't asking anymore. They were building a case. Over the next 2 weeks, more letters followed, each one sharper than the last. One questioned my income. Another outlined expected standards for caregiving. Another referenced environmental suitability, which was a careful way of saying my apartment might not be enough. None of it was false. That's what made it effective. They weren't trying to prove I was failing, I realized. They were trying to make it look like I wasn't enough. The pressure didn't come all at once. It layered. Work, home, paperwork. At the warehouse, I picked up extra shifts when they were available. At the shop, I stayed later when someone called out. The hours blurred into each other until days felt more like sections of the same long stretch. One afternoon, after picking up her medication, I stopped by the pharmacy counter longer than usual. Maribel noticed. "You've got that look again," she said, scanning a label before handing me the bag. "What look?" "The one that says something's coming and you're not sure from where." I handed her one of the letters. She read it carefully, then exhaled through her nose. "They're not coming at you directly. They're setting up a framework." "For what?" "For control," she said. "If they can get legal authority, they don't need your permission anymore." That shifted everything. This wasn't just family tension anymore. It was a system. Later that week, she connected me with someone who understood the process better than I did. We met briefly in the back office of the pharmacy, nothing formal, just a quiet conversation. "They're fishing," he told me, "seeing what sticks. If they can show instability, even in small ways, they can push for guardianship." "I'm doing everything I can," I said. He nodded. "That might not be the point." That was the part that stayed with me. Have you ever done everything right and still felt like it wasn't going to be enough? I went home that night with a different kind of awareness. Not panic, structure. I cleared a section of the table and started organizing. Medication logs, times, dosages, dates, daily routines written out in plain terms. Appointments, even the minor ones. Receipts stacked and sorted. I used my phone to take pictures of the apartment, the layout, the safety adjustments, the way that had arranged things to make it easier for her to move around. Not dramatic, not obsessive, just prepared. If they were going to question me, I thought, I was going to make sure they had nothing to use. Days passed like that. Work, home, documentation. Sleep came in shorter pieces. Meals became whatever fit between tasks. The apartment didn't feel like protection anymore. It felt like a line that could be crossed. One night after she had settled into her chair and the room had gone quiet, I sat at the table alone. The papers were spread out in front of me. Notes, records, bills, everything I had been holding together. For a moment, it all felt too heavy. This isn't my fight. The thought came back, quieter than before, but clearer. They made it mine. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting that sit. If I stepped away, it would stop. The letters would stop. The pressure would shift somewhere else. I could go back to something simpler. Then another thought followed, one I couldn't ignore. They didn't want to take care of her. They wanted access. That changed everything. This wasn't about responsibility. It was about what she represented. I sat forward again, gathering the papers into a single stack. Not scattered, organized, deliberate. When I finished, I placed them neatly at the corner of the table, within reach but out of the way. Not as clutter, as preparation. I looked over at her. She was still awake, watching, like she always did. And for the first time since the letters started, I didn't feel like I was reacting anymore. I was ready. If they wanted a fight, I thought, I wasn't going to lose it by being unprepared. That's when something else started to become clear. Something I should have seen from the beginning. She was never as powerless as they thought. It didn't happen during a crisis. No raised voices, no pressure, just a quiet evening. The kind that had started to feel normal in a life that hadn't been normal in months. I was at the table, going over the documents again. Not because I had to that night, but because I needed to understand what I was standing in. The heater clicked behind the wall. A cup of tea sat near my elbow, cooling untouched. She was across from me watching. I didn't look up right away. They think I don't know what I'm doing, I said almost under my breath, more to the room than to her. There was a pause. Then I heard it. A sound. Small. Not fully formed, but deliberate. I froze. Slowly, I lifted my head. She didn't repeat it. She didn't look startled or confused. She just held my gaze. That was enough. She could speak, I realized. She just wasn't choosing to. The room didn't change. Nothing around me moved. But everything inside the situation shifted. I leaned back slightly, studying her differently now. Not as someone fragile, not as someone dependent, but as someone who had been observing carefully. Over the next few days, I replayed everything. The way she corrected small things, the timing of her reactions, the way her attention sharpened when certain topics came up, even on the television. This wasn't recovery. This was control. She had been watching all of us, I thought, waiting. Not out of fear, out of judgment. That part didn't sit easy because it meant she had seen everything, including me, the nights I nearly broke, the moments I hesitated, the times I almost made the call. She had been there for all of it, and she had said nothing. At first that unsettled me. Then it forced something else, a question I hadn't really faced before. Why was I doing all this? Was it just responsibility? Or was I still trying to prove something? To them. To the same people who had already decided what I was worth. I sat with that longer than I expected to. They weren't going to see me differently, I realized, no matter what I did. That truth didn't hit hard. It settled in. Quiet. Final. For years, I had been the one who handled things. The one who didn't argue. The one who showed up when something needed to be done. Reliable, replaceable, invisible. I had thought if I did enough, eventually it would matter. It didn't. And it wasn't going to start now. What changes when you stop trying to earn your place and start deciding what you're willing to tolerate? That was the shift. Not anger, not rebellion, clarity. I didn't need to be enough for them, I thought. I needed to be clear for myself. After that, the way I looked at everything changed. Not dramatically, just sharper. I went back through the documents again, but this time not as someone defending a position, as someone trying to understand a pattern. Why now? Why the urgency? Why had they left her without hesitation, but returned with precision? The pieces didn't line up the way they should have. There were gaps, things implied but never explained. References to accounts but no clear origin. Mentions of timing that didn't match what I had been told. This wasn't just about money, it was about access and control over something they didn't want me to understand yet. That realization didn't make me louder. It made me more careful, more selective. I stopped reacting to their messages right away. I read them once, then again, then waited. Short answers, nothing extra. No information that wasn't necessary. Not out of fear, out of intent. One night after finishing another round of organizing the paperwork, I sat across from her again. But it felt different now. I wasn't trying to help. I wasn't trying to figure her out. I just looked at her and said, "You know more than you're saying." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. That was enough. We didn't need words for it. There was an understanding there now, clear, mutual. I gathered the papers into a clean stack and set them to one side of the table. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was preparing for whatever came next. I wasn't waiting for them to stop, I realized. I was waiting for the right moment. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel small inside it. I felt steady, grounded in something that didn't depend on them anymore. I thought I was ready, until they made their move first. I knew something was coming before they said it out loud. It started with a call from the bank, polite, neutral, asking if I could come in to review some documents, related to an account connected to my grandmother. Routine, they said, but nothing about this had been routine for a long time. I arranged a morning I could step away from work, told Maribel. She didn't ask many questions, just said, "I'll meet you there." We arrived a few minutes early. The building downtown was quiet in that controlled way banks always are. Clean floors, soft voices, everything structured to keep things calm. Even when they weren't. They were already inside. Lenora, Corwin, Bram, sitting around a small conference table like they had been waiting. No one smiled. No one said hello. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a transaction. I helped her into the chair beside me. Maribel stayed slightly behind, close enough to step in if needed, far enough not to draw attention. A bank representative sat across from us, professional, measured. Corwin started talking before anyone else could. "We're here to finalize some necessary adjustments," he said, sliding a new set of documents forward. Cleaner, more formal than before. "Just to stabilize things," he added. Stabilize. That word again. He spoke like it was simple, like this was just paperwork catching up with reality. The representative turned to my grandmother. "Ma'am, do you understand what is being requested today?" Silence. Corwin leaned in slightly, guiding the pen closer to her hand. "She just needs to confirm," he said. I placed my hand over the documents. "She doesn't have to sign anything." Lenora's voice cut in, sharper than before. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't look at her. "No," I said. "I'm making it clear." The representative paused, then repeated the question, slower this time. "Do you understand what is being requested?" There was a moment where everything held still. Then, "I understand exactly what they want." The voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Every movement stopped. Corwin froze mid-breath. Lenora didn't speak. Bram looked down like something inside him had already shifted. I didn't move, but inside everything changed. She sat there steady. No hesitation, no confusion. "I have understood from the beginning," she continued. The representative straightened slightly. "So you are aware of the nature of these documents?" "Yes," she said, "and I have chosen not to sign them." The control in her voice wasn't new. It had just never been spoken out loud. Corwin tried to recover. "This isn't about choice," he said quickly. "It's about what's necessary for the family." She turned her head toward him. "Just enough. I made my decision when you made yours." That landed harder than anything else said in the room. Then she continued, "I have not lost my capacity. I have not been unaware. I chose silence because it showed me who you all were when you thought I had nothing left." No one interrupted her. No one could. Then came the part they hadn't planned for. "The assets you are trying to access," she said, "are no longer available to you." Corwin's composure slipped. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said evenly, "they were transferred months ago." "To who?" Lenora asked, voice tightening. She didn't look at them when she answered. She looked at me. "To him." The room shifted again. The representative checked something on a tablet, then nodded slowly. "The account has been reassigned," he confirmed. "All changes were completed with full documentation and independent review." Corwin leaned forward. "That's not possible. He wouldn't." "I did," she said. Simple. Final. What would you do if the person everyone thought was powerless turned out to be the one who saw everything clearly? Bram tried to speak next. "It was supposed to help all of us," he said, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "It helped you," she replied, "until it didn't." Lenora reached for something emotional, something softer. "We were trying to protect what's left." "No," she said, "you were trying to take what you thought I couldn't protect." That ended it. Not with a raised voice, with clarity. No one had leverage anymore. Corwin gathered the papers, slower this time, not controlled, just aware. The representative closed the folder. "There's nothing further to process today," he said. I stood and helped her up. No one stopped us. No one argued. We walked out the same way we came in, calm, measured, final. As we stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter. Not because everything was solved, because something had ended. I thought about that note again. Don't contact us again. Back then, it felt like abandonment. Now it felt like something else. A line. A decision. They had left her at my door like she had nothing left. They just didn't know what she still had. The days after the bank meeting didn't explode the way I expected. No loud fallout, no dramatic confrontations. Just quiet consequences. What came after wasn't loud, but it changed everything for good. A few months later, I was standing in a different apartment. Not temporary, not something I had to adjust around. 2 actual bedrooms, a kitchen where things had space instead of being stacked out of necessity. Light coming in through wide windows that didn't feel like they were fighting to get through. It wasn't luxury, it was stability. She sat near the window again the same way she always had, hands folded, watching the world outside. But nothing about her felt small anymore. And for the first time in a long while, neither did I. The legal aftermath unfolded in pieces, not headlines. I heard things through small updates. Bram's situation didn't disappear. It got examined. Slowly, quietly. The kind of process that doesn't shout but doesn't go away either. Corwin stepped back. Not publicly, just less visible, less certain. The confidence he used to carry had a different edge now. Lenora stopped reaching out altogether. No calls, no messages, no effort to explain. They didn't fall apart, I realized. They just lost the ability to pretend. Life didn't reset, it settled. I still worked, still kept routines, still handled things day by day, but the pressure that used to sit behind everything, it wasn't there anymore. One afternoon after coming back from work, I checked my phone while standing in the kitchen. There was a message, Lenora. We should talk. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just those 3 words. I read it once, then again, and for a moment I felt the weight of everything that had led up to that message. The note, the silence, the months of pressure, the way they had stepped back into my life only when they needed something. I set the phone down on the counter. Didn't respond right away. Didn't feel the need to. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Not every door needs to be reopened. Would you have answered? Or is peace sometimes choosing not to? I left the message there, unanswered. Later that evening, after dinner, I rinsed the dishes and wiped down the counter. The kind of small routine that didn't feel heavy anymore. When I turned, she was watching me, not studying, not waiting, just present. I sat across from her like I had so many times before, but there was no tension now, no testing, no guessing what was hidden. She spoke when she wanted to, not often, never more than necessary. That night, she looked at me and said, "You did well." Simple, direct, no extra weight. But it stayed because I knew she didn't say things lightly, and she didn't say anything she didn't mean. I nodded once, didn't try to add to it, didn't need to. Later, I went to the drawer where I had placed the note. I unfolded it again. Don't contact us again. The same words, but they didn't feel the same. Before they felt like rejection, like being pushed out. Now they felt like something else, a boundary, a line that had already been drawn. I folded it carefully and placed it back. Not as something that hurt, as something that marked where things had changed. The days kept moving after that. Work, home, quiet evenings. Nothing dramatic, nothing unstable. Just life without the constant strain of trying to hold something together that was never really there. Sometimes I would catch myself standing by the window, the same way she used to. Looking out, not for anything in particular. Just steady. They didn't become a better family. I just stopped needing them to be one. And that made all the difference. I didn't get everything back, but I stopped losing myself trying to hold on to what was never really there.